Hey there, CS320 students. So in this recording, we're going to talk about the service implementation that you have for your assignments and then how to get those tested. So we are looking at the Module 3 milestone guidelines and rubrics. So we're going to scroll down here. So we've already kind of talked about the data encapsulation classes from previously. So here we have to create a service implementation that lets you add, delete, and update. So we see that the requirements are that you have to be able to add context, has to be a unique ID. So one of the things that we have to be able to test is what if it's not a unique ID? So what if we do a duplicate ID, right? This should throw an exception. We should be able to delete contacts per contact ID. So the happy path is, yep, we get an ID that exists, but we also need to consider what happens if you are given an ID that doesn't exist. We should handle that as well. We should be able to update the contact fields per contact ID. So we should be able to update our data encapsulation class, and that is based on its ID. Again, the happy path is it exists, and we update one of these fields. Otherwise, the bad path is what if we send it an ID that doesn't exist? We should handle that appropriately. So if we go to the course announcements, you'll find the project details, and we scroll down here. And so for the service classes, again, we know we have to add, edit, and delete. You need to use an appropriate data structure to persist the data during runtime. That's up to you. You could use a list or a map. Either one will work just fine. Again, we know that the add method does not allow duplicate entries, so we're going to throw an illegal argument exception when you attempt to add a duplicate entry. So you need to handle that with the ID already exists. And then we're going to use the no such element exception on the delete and edit methods if you are trying to send it an ID that doesn't exist. So the service classes should have this kind of design. We have to have an appropriate data structure for it. We're going to go with a no argument constructor that initializes the data structure. So we're not going to go with a singleton or anything. In fact, we're not doing like a Spring Boot microservice or anything. That's beyond the scope of what we want to do. We're just going to create a class that lets us hold this data structure and then has an add, delete, and edit method. The add method is going to be void. It needs to accept a parameter of the type. So if it's a task, or in the tutorial we'll see it's a school. The delete method is going to take the ID as a parameter. And then the edit method takes a parameter of the type as well. Now, one thing that you're going to need in order to actually test this is you will need to provide a get method that returns all of the elements of the data structure, as well as a get by ID method that returns the element from the data structure. And again, if it's not there, then we're going to return null in this case. So these are needed because how do you test if you actually added a value? Right? So if you're going to test to see that it was added, then you should be able to add it and then do a get call and get that particular element. Same thing with a delete. We want to check to ensure that the element is there. So we'll need a get by ID to ensure that it's there, and then we delete it. And then if we do a get by ID and it's not there anymore, then we've proven that we've actually done the deletion. So these methods are helper methods that you're going to need in order to test thoroughly. Just like the testing of the data encapsulation object, we're going to have a separate service class and a separate package, a separate service class and a separate testing class for that. Just like before, we're going to use test names that are the form the functionality with their condition and the expected result. So something like test add with a duplicate ID, that should throw an illegal argument exception. I do recommend for testing the service classes, have a private instance of the service class globally, and then you reinitialize that service class in a setup method with the before each annotation. This lets you reuse that service class and then reset it for each test. And we'll see that here in a second. Again, we want to use the AAA pattern that we saw previously. And then again, our code should be in a packaged format. So let's go ahead and continue with our schools example here. So previously we created the school class. It's got an ID and a name. And let's go ahead and create a service class. So we're going to go into our source directory. And so right-click, New, Class, and we'll just call it School Service. Now, we're not going to completely follow test-driven development here. We're going to go ahead and create a little bit of infrastructure here. So we've got this up and running. So we want a data structure. So I'm going to use a list. And we'll import from Java util. That should be private. And we'll have a constructor, default constructor, and it's going to initialize that list. Okay, great. So that's as far as we're going to take it in terms of non-test driven development. So I've got a school service. It's got a list that's going to back it. And when I call the constructor, I'm going to have a new list each and every time. All right, so let's come in here and let's create a test class. So we'll right-click, New Class. This will be Test School Service. And again, I mentioned that we want to have a private member. I'm just going to call it service. And then we're going to use the at before each annotation. And we're going to have a setup. And so in here, we're going to new up the school service each and every time. So this guarantees between tests, your service is reset, okay? So import that. Again, we want org JUnit Jupyter. So again, if you go back to the project details announcement, all test cases are independent of each other. You never want to set up a test where it's dependent on the results of something else, right? Where there's a test that adds an element, and then there's a different test that expects it to be present. We do not want to do that. Our arrange, act, and assert pattern is going to handle all the things that a test case would need to do in order to function. All right, so let's go ahead and do a little TDD here. So let's do a public void test add with new element successfully adds. Put our test annotation on here. Again, we'll let the IDE import it. We want the org.JUnit Jupyter one. Great. And we're going to put some comments blocks on here so we can keep this nice and organized. So we're going to put all the add functionality present underneath this comment block right here. And we know we need to have a delete, and we need to have, an edit area as well. So we're going to keep our code, all of our test cases, in the same area. Okay, so test add with new elements. So we're going to have to create, right? So AAA, the arrange, we need to create a new school. So arrange, create a new school. Act is going to add it to the service. And then the assert is check that the new school was added. Okay, so let's go ahead and do some TDD here. So school, new school equals new school, and we have to give it an ID and a name. And we'll just call it Maplewood Elementary School. Oh, wait. We've got fixes on here. Requirements, it can only be like 10 characters. So let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, great. Now, this test, this service layer is not worrying about the format of the school. We are only going to be testing the service implementation. So now we want to do our service.add, and we're going to give it new school. So arrange right here, we created our new school, and act right here, we're going to try to add it. Well, in TDD, a failure due to compilation is a failing test. So we do not have an add method. So let's go ahead and create it. So create that method. Public void add school, fantastic. So again, we do just enough to make this test compile. All right, great. So there it is. So now this is going to compile. Great, so compiles. Now we need to assert. So assertions.assert, we're going to say true that service.get new school.id. Let's actually use an assert equals. So I want to assert that and I get the school by ID, it is equal to new school. And let's make sure I've got all my parentheses lined up. I open one. So get, that's got to close it. And that needs to be closed right there. So remember, we're doing TDD. So in order for this to actually be testable, we have to be able to get it. So we need to go implement this get method. All right. There we go. And this is going to return a school. So here is where we loop through our schools and get the one matching by ID. So for school in schools, if school.getID is equal to the ID that came in, we found it, we're going to break out of the loop. So we need some kind of, we're going to return the actual school. So we're going to do this, school, found school is what I'll call it. I'm going to set it equal to null. And found school is going to equal the school that we just found right here. Great, we found it, we're going to break out. Otherwise, if we get through this loop, we didn't find it, it's equal to null, so we're going to return our found school. Here's where Java docs are so important. Get the school by ID, returns the school if found, otherwise returns null. Right? Documentation is so powerful. Okay, so I think this code is going to work. It's going to get our school, fantastic. And so we're going to come in here, and now I don't have any syntax errors. I should be able to right-click, run as JUnit test, and fantastic. I have got a passing test. Now, here's the question. When I do this assert equals, have I implemented an equals method that tests that these are actually true? If I don't provide an equals method, it's only checking the object reference. So really what we need to do is go to our school class, and we're going to let Lumbach create an @equals and hashcode method. So it's going to go field by field and ensure that we are the same. So right click. Oops, I don't want test school. I can close test school. Test school service, right click, run as JUnit, and great, it is actually passing. Again, if I don't have that equals method, it's only going to be checking the reference, and they are the same reference each and every time. In fact, let me see if I can, if I were to go to the school service, really what I should do here is I shouldn't return found school. I should actually do this. We should return a new copy. Right, so let me go back, and let's do a breakpoint here. Right click, debug as JUnit test. And so if you're not familiar with the debugger in Eclipse, I can put a breakpoint, I can highlight code. When I hit Control-Shift-I, oops, I need to do this. I need to grab all of that right there. Control-Shift-I. So when I see this ID equals 75, this is kind of the unique identifier in Java. I can see the code down here is like it ends in 8C6. Take a look here. See how this ends in 8C6 and that ID 75? These are equal because they're the same reference. If I do this, let me get rid of that equals and hash code. Let me make it so that I return. I should really do a new copy each and every time. And let me create a copy constructor. Got it. I'm going to call this, and I'm going to give it the ID. So I'm going to call the constructor above school.id, and found, I'll call it other here in a second, .name. We'll call that other. So now I have a copy constructor, and watch this. Save all, terminate. Okay, so now my syntax error is gone. So watch this. Now when I debug this, debug JUnit. So watch this. The ID attribute here ends in 0C5. Cross your fingers. This should not end in 0C5 right there. Not the same reference. And when I hit the green continue button here, when I go back, I see that this failed. And that fails because it is not checking the, this is checking the reference, and the references are not the same. If I want it to actually use the equals method, now I uncomment out my equals and hash code. I thought oh, yeah, right here. So uncomment out my equals and hash code, save. Let's come back here, right click, debug our test. So again, just to prove to you, my ID is 82, ends in 8C6. This ID is 75. I'm not exactly sure I'm getting the same there, but now when I hit the green continue button, my test passes because the equals method that was implemented here is actually checking these fields to make sure that they are the exact same. So if you're unfamiliar with how the equals method works in Java, now you know. Okay, so now we've got a test where I arrange, act, and assert. I create my school. That's arrange. I act upon it, and then I add it to the list. What if we want to test add with duplicate element throws illegal argument exception? At test. So again, we have to arrange act and assert. So we need a duplicate element. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create this school. So there's our arrange. In the act, check that the school doesn't exist. Then add to the list. And then in the assert, we should get a illegal argument exception when we add the same element. So here we go. Service.get new school.getID. So we should get it back, right? So we're going to do this assertions.assert null. So we're not going to have null. Let's see here. Do I have a not null? I should have a not null. Assert not null. There we go. That's what I want. Right, so I know that if it exists, it's not null. So let's go ahead and check, right click, run as JUnit. And, oh, I forgot to add it to the list. Let's do that first. Service.add new school. All right, great. Now we right click, run as JUnit. Okay, so again, I'm passing. I added it, and I do not get null back, which means it's been added. So now we'll come down here, and we're going to do a service.add. We're going to add that same exact school again. And so we want to assert illegal argument exception gets thrown. And remember, we're going to pass in a lambda, so we're actually going to call this method right here as a lambda. Okay, so what do I need? What does it not like? Oh, illegal argument exception. Okay, so now we're going to right click, run as JUnit. We have our failing test because we have not implemented the throwing of the illegal argument. So let's go to our add method and take care of that. So here we go. So inside the add method, we need to check to see if it exists first. So we know for sure that we have to do a loop. So for school in schools, if school.getID is equal to the new school.getID, then we have a duplicate. So we know for sure we don't need to keep looping. So we have a duplicate school. So what do we want to do here? Let's use a Boolean. Is duplicate. And we'll set it to true here. And so we can come down here, and if is duplicate, so if that's the case, then we throw a new illegal argument exception. Cannot add school with duplicate ID, and we'll even give them what that ID was. New school.getID. Okay, great. So if we get through that, then that means we can add the school because it is not a duplicate. All right, so let's go back to our test, right click, run as, JUnit, and all right, great, fantastic. We are seeing here that when we create the school, we add it. When we add it a second time, it throws the illegal argument exception. Is there anything else we need to test here? So we tested adding with a new element. So that works just fine. A duplicate element. Let's look at our announcement. So void accepts a parameter of the type. One thing that we probably should test here that I don't have written down is what if we add a null? That should throw an illegal argument exception, right? If you put a null in there, what would our service do? So if we send in a null, we are going to have a null pointer exception right here. So if we put in null, that's going to throw a null pointer exception. So we should catch that before it actually even gets there. So something to add, and I will be probably updating. We need to update that list, right? We can't add a null, so that should be handled in testing as well. Okay, that's going to do it for this recording. I will talk to you next time.